So you play fantasy football and you're interested in building your own little app to help you draft like a pro. So what we're building is a CLI application that is going to suck in a bunch of fantasy football projections from various different sources. It's going to aggregate them and calculate some maths and stuff, and it's going to spit out a CSV that you can plug into any spreadsheet, that you can sort, that you can throw filters on, that's going to help you dominate your fantasy football draft. Let me show you what the super high level looks like. So this is your app right here. This is a CLI app. And the language you choose to write this in, I don't care. Pick whatever language you're most comfortable in, because it's going to look simple on the surface, but there's going to be some nuances and some details in there. And we're under a tight deadline since fantasy football draft season is fast approaching here in the next few weeks. So your CLI app sits here in the middle. You have these many different sources of input that you're going to be scraping from. These are your sources, and this is mostly HTML data, raw HTML, however that website spits it out, that you're going to have to suck in. This side, you're going to have to clean up to get the numbers and everything you want out of it, and that you're going to produce your final output for this data pipeline. As you'll see in a minute, this turns out to be a data pipeline. You're going to spit out a CSV that you can then plug into any spreadsheet you want and sort and filter to your heart's content. Now we're calling this I'm going to call this a VOR CSV. And what VOR stands for is value over replacement. So you may have heard this term used in baseball where you take a baseline player at a particular position and you call that player the replacement level. So then you can compare every player at that position against that baseline replacement level player. So then what that allows you to do is it allows you to compare players across positions. So when you're sitting there in your fantasy football draft here in a few weeks, and you're seeing, oh, should I draft a running back or should I draft a wide receiver? Maybe a tight end or something. You'll be able to see at a glance, like which player at that particular position is worth more than another player at another position. And it'll make your drafting dead simple, brain dead easy. And that's what we're going to build with our silly level app. So this is the high level architecture, I guess, or design. Now let's dig into the details of this. Okay, let's jump into the details of the design. Like what the hell in the damn hell are we building? We're building a draft or a VOR draft cheat sheet. And this is going to be a CLI app in your favorite language. And this is going to break down into 3 distinct stages. And as I mentioned before, we're building a data pipeline. So we're going to start with those sources that we talked about in the high level and the super high level. And we're going to crunch it down into that final CSV. So if we start over here, the first component, component of stage 1 is scrape. And most of you have probably heard of data scraping before. It's going out to the wild internet and pulling data from publicly available sources, just scraping it right off the internet. So I know of a handful of sources that provide free projections for every single player for the season. Okay, so after our scrape stage, so the scrape stage is taking in all this HTML data, right? Most of this is all HTML. There may be some JSON in there as well, but it's pretty easy to parse. Like there's libraries that can parse it, whatever your favorite language is. So we're just taking all this scrape data here, and then we're going to feed that to a clean component. And you can use, if you wanted to do this the fancy way, now you could put yourself a little queue in the middle here, and like a producer consumer type paradigm where your scraper is scraping HTML from these sites, dumping that into a queue, and then your clean is just picking it up as the consumer of that data and cleaning it and doing stuff with it. Or you don't have to do any of that at all. This could be a synchronous operation. So if we're taking this HTML, this is HTML raw, and it's pumping it into our clean component here. What our clean component's doing is it's taking that HTML, it's parsing out all the bits and pieces, all the stats, all the player information and everything, and kind of organizing it into a data structure that we can actually work with. Now, I like to use JSON for this because JSON's pretty easy to work with. You can stash it in the file system if you wanted to come back to it later. You could pass it around relatively easy, but it's up to you, whatever this format looks like for you, whatever clean looks like to you. And if you wanted to get fancy, you could use a little database down here if you wanted to. If you're like super ahead of the curve and you just want to stuff it into a SQLite database or some heavyweight Postgres server bullshit database, go for it. Nobody's stopping you. You're a free individual. Exercise your freedom. This is America, I guess. Something like that. So now we're going to move over to stage 2. So we've cleaned our data. It's in some format that you can actually work with. So the first component of stage 2 is correlate. So you have all this data, right? It's coming from multiple different sources. So each player, each draftable fantasy player is going to appear in your cleaned data set, whatever that looks like, multiple times. So now you have to figure out, you got to match those players with their stats from that source so that you can aggregate those things together so that you can then do the rest of your data processing. So that's what our correlate stage is doing. The next component after that is calculate. So once we get all of those players aggregated, we have a key and then a list of stats for that player, right? The key is the player, and then stats from this source, stats from this source, stats from this source, stats from this source. Where stats is projections, but you get the picture there. And again, you could do something fancy here. If you had a paradigm over here where you're putting up a queue between these and producer consumer, you could do the same over here because there's going to be a lot of data in your correlate stage that you're pushing through. And if you kind of wanted to parallelize the shit, you could use a queue as well. So this is going to be some probably key value pair that you're passing into this queue, where you have a key and then the list of stats for each player. It's going to take into the calculate phase. Now in the calculate stage, now you have all those stats aggregated per player. Now you're just going to calculate averages for every player across all the stat categories there are. So like passing yards for quarterbacks, rushing yards for running backs, receiving yards, receptions, touchdowns, all that shit. And I want to keep this clear here is that scoring is different for every fantasy football platform, right? They're all at least a little bit slightly different. So you want to be as agnostic as possible about the actual fantasy points that you're calculating. So that's why we're just calculating averages across all the stats instead of the averages of the actual projected fantasy points. Now, if you play in a specific league and that's the only league you play in, and you have no ambitions to maybe try and sell your VOR cheat sheet in the future to some unsuspecting sucker, then just use that scoring system, and you can simplify this a lot by just focusing on one number to take an average of across the board. But for me, I play in multiple fantasy leagues, so I like to keep it generic so that I can score it later when we get to the next stage and we start calculating our VOR. But for now, we're calculating the averages across all the stats. So the clean is going to feed this data into here and correlate it, then calculate it. Now the data from the clean stage over here, this could come from a file system. So you could actually run these in different commands instead of running it all every single time you run it all. You know, especially as you're developing, you might want to stash this off in a file system and pull it from the file system and correlate so that you don't keep hitting these sources over here and potentially banning yourself because you bombarded them with too many freaking requests. Don't do that. It's bad, okay? It's bad. My mama said it was bad to do that. She's my mama, so she's always right. Okay, so now we have everything we need to start putting this into a form that we can actually consume and use in the wild in our fantasy draft. So the first component of stage 3 is called normalize. So calculate is going to pump its data into here, and it's going to be the average. So again, this is probably some kind of key value pair where instead of a list, now you have a single line of stats for that player, and that line of stats is the average of each of its various stat categories. And what normalize is going to do is it's going to take those, it's going to calculate a projection based on the fantasy scoring system of your choice, and you can have multiple here. And then normalize is going to select our value over replacement player for every position. So it's going to use some kind of formula, and you're free to choose the formula that you want. I typically use like the number of teams in a league and the number of players that you can play at a particular position. And you just take the worst starter and call that the baseline for each player. Or you could use some other method if you wanted to. But that's what the normalize is going to do. It's going to take all of those calculations. It's going to figure out which one is the baseline. And then it's going to calculate that value over replacement number, which you can use various formats for that too. You could say, take the player's projection minus the baseline player's projection and just use a whole number like that. You could take it as a ratio where you have the baseline player divided into the other player's projection so that you get kind of a greater than 1 is good, lower than 1 is below replacement, and you could do it that way. I tend to do the latter. I tend to do the division. I like to divide them in there and get, 2 or 3 decimal points of precision. And it's just, I think it looks cleaner and cooler to me, and it's easier to use, and you can get more granular, but the method you use is up to you. So after our normalize, we are going to go into our final component, which is package. And what package is going to do is this is the most important component in this entire data pipeline here. Package is going to take that normalized data with the VOR calculations in it and turn it into our VOR CSV. That's it. That's going to be your output. Now you could take this VOR CSV and you can stick it on a file system. Most likely you'll stick it on a file system. If you wanted to get fancy, you could go back to your database and stick it in your database. Or if you wanted to get even fancier, you could put it in some kind of JSON format, stick it in a cloud instance, build yourself a little UI around it to where you didn't have to go to a spreadsheet, and build your own little filtering and sorting freaking interface if you wanted to. But that's only if you're fancy. I would imagine most of you aren't fancy. Most of you just want to get this shit done so that you can have a good draft. And that's it. That's the entire data pipeline that we're building. Seems pretty simple, right? Of course, the devil's in the details. And I would say out of all of these stages here, stage 1 is probably going to be the most time consuming and tedious to do. And more specifically, this clean stage right here, where you're dealing with all this HTML that's in different formats. You got to search it differently. You got to parse it differently. Each one of these sources is going to have its own way of parsing out that data. So let me show you the roadmap now, and you can see what our milestones are for this entire project. We're starting this in early August. This is 2026, August 3rd. If you're watching this in the future, then pick 4 weeks or so into the future where you're actually going to have this done. So this week, this project kickoff is today, August 3rd. And we're going to do this in weekly chunks. So the next video I make and publish will be on August the 10th, a week from today. And then another week from then, I'll publish another video with another milestone. And then the final video, this actually won't be the final video of the series, but it'll be the final homework that you need to do before our big demo on August 31st. And by here, right here on August 31st, this is why this is so exciting, is you'll be ready to go off and do your draft in the next week or so before the NFL season starts. So it's important that we get there in a logical, sane way. So the first week here is this week here. So this is the project kickoff. So this is week 1. This is our project kickoff, where I tell you what we're building. You'll get some homework in the newsletter, and please go subscribe to the newsletter if you want to get the homework for this week. And the homework is going to be building the initial stage of this scrape and clean operation right here, scrape and clean stage. So your homework is going to be scrape and clean round 1. So this is going to be due on August the 10th. So on August the 10th, in this video, this will be week 2, I will be demoing my scraper and cleaner, at least the initial one. I already have some designs up in my head, so I'm kind of cheating here because I get to write the rules. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And your homework in week 2 is going to be scraper and cleaner round 2. So effectively this week we're going to build like the skeleton of our scraper and cleaner, like the workflow for it. Like, how do we pull in HTML data? How do we stage it up so it can start to be cleaned? And then in this week, on August 10th, this week to August 17th, we're going to take that HTML data, and for each of those sources that we have, we're going to build a little customized scraper for it. This is going to be the most tedious part. This is going to be the biggest pain in the ass to get right. I'm not sure a week is enough. If you've never done scraping before, if you've never navigated HTML before, this can be quite challenging. But lucky for you, in week 3, I will demo the final scraper and cleaner. So you'll see how it's done. And if you're nice to me, maybe I'll share the code with you in case you're not finished. And that way it'll give you a head start for the final stages here. So our homework for this stage is we're going to start working on stage 2 now. So this is where we correlate and calculate our averages. Calculate. So you can tell how this goes now. So week 4, I will be demoing my correlator and calculator. And by here, we'll have averages for all of the players across all of the positions that are fantasy draftable. So it's pretty exciting. You can see the home stretch from here. And so our homework here is going to be that stage 3 component where we're normalizing, we're calculating that VOR projection or that VOR number. We're going to normalize, and then we're going to package, and it's going to spit out that final CSV so that when we get into week 5 here, where I'm going to demo my normalizer and packager. And then that's it, the end. But I got some special homework for you for this week, for week 5. And doesn't have anything to do with development. And I mentioned this a little earlier when I was talking about if you had eyes on or ambitions for selling this at some point in the future. Whether you sell your app to somebody and they can run off and calculate their own CSV using your app, or you take that CSV and you package it up and you sell it as a digital product on the wild internet. So your homework is going to be to design a landing page for your implementation of this VOR draft cheat sheet generator, whatever the hell you want to call it. And the whole ideal of this is to start getting you into the business mindset of software development. So we're not just working on these rando ding dong idea projects, that we're actually trying to start and make money with our skills and our craft and our creativity. And this is going to be like the initial stages of starting to do that. And we will do that for every project from here on out. But this is effectively your roadmap here. This is your work right here. And this box is what you're going to be working on for the next handful of weeks or so. And again, I want you to use the language of your choice. Don't make this hard on yourself and choose some esoteric language that you've never used before. Don't use Zig or Odin or some kind of weird thing that isn't stable and doesn't have a good ecosystem with it, because you're going to have to parse HTML. You're probably going to have to deal with JSON. You may, if you're going to do fancying and do some queuing stuff, then you're going to have to deal with queues, but I heavily dissuade you from using like a heavyweight like RabbitMQ or something like that. Use a lightweight queue if you're going to do that. You may have to deal with database stuff if you choose to go that route. You're going to have to deal with a file system, although most languages these days come with methods for manipulating files. But they don't all come with methods for manipulating JSON and HTML for sure. And you don't want to have to parse this as part of this exercise. Maybe in the future, we'll dig into parsing this stuff. But right now, just make it easy on yourself. Make this as easy as possible, because I guarantee this is not as easy as it looks. There's some complexity and tedium in here that you're going to have to deal with. So use the language of your choice. Don't put this in a public Git repo. Don't put in a public Git repo. Keep it private at least. Keep it local, preferably. And that's pretty much it. Those are your only two rules. Oh, one more rule. Be respectful of the sources. You don't want to get yourself banned. They don't do it by IP now and how many requests that you're making. They do it by behavior now. So you're not a typical web browser. You're just going to be requesting the HTML and then you're going to be hanging up the connection. They don't tend to like that. So be respectful and don't bombard them with requests. So that's it. Those are the only 3 rules I got for you. Those are the only 3 rules. Pick a language of your choice. Don't put it in a public repo. Treat this like it's proprietary. And then respect your sources, and you're going to do great. Now, like I said, go right now to the website. I got a link in the description to this week's homework, which is to build the first round of your scraper and cleaner. And I will see you next time, where we'll demo my scraper and cleaner, the first version of it, and then we'll talk about the second part of your homework. Yeah, bye-bye,